advisory services, and respect for the integrity of the reader. The creator and founder of Novelist, an electronic guide where the words and advice of other readers can help you to find your next great literary experience. Duncan Smith is the recipient of the Margaret E. Monroe Award from the American Library Association's Reference and User Services Division. And if there are any students here, I should also remind you that Novelist is hiring. Next, Mary Boone, State Librarian. Our distinguished alumna Mary Boone leads librarianship in the state of North Carolina after an enviable career with the United States Information Agency in Asia, the Middle East, Europe, and Washington. She directed the State Department's International Library Program from 1999 to 2002 and oversaw the planning and development of the Jefferson Information Center, the Department of State Library and Research Service from 2002 to 2005. Michel Bézi of IBM. Michel directs the Autonomic Computing Organization, a division of IBM whose mission is to contribute to the company's continuing leadership in the information technology industry. Since joining IBM more than 20 years ago, he's held highly responsible positions in software, product and content management, and business strategy. He's also a former educator whose contributions to our student interns at IBM have been very satisfying to observe. And finally, Deborah Jacobs of Duke University Libraries. Ms. Jacobs is the Rita D.G. Alondardo Hollow. Did I do that?
D.G. Alondardo Hollow.
Right, that's what I said. Your title means that I presume that you have a fold-out business card. It's the longest.
It's really
She is a university librarian and vice provost for library affairs at Duke University. By its very nature, a position of national and international significance in academic library leadership. Her record in collections and international education and her service to ARL and CRL make her a knowledgeable observer of global information needs and services. A Latin American historian, Dr. Jacobs is also an adjunct associate professor of history at Duke. So we can adapt our format as we wish. Let's start at this end with Deborah, if we may.
Okay, I do want to say just a few of my, as I call them, semi-prepared remarks. So, but this morning I was reading the newspaper and I was thinking a little, I guess, had in the back of my mind that I would be coming here today. And I read this fascinating article about how the best surgeons are also the best video game players. Did anyone else read that article? I thought that was just fascinating. So it made me reflect on where skills come from and how they transfer and things like that. So I've been a librarian for almost 27 years, and most of that time I've spent at Duke. So that may seem like a kind of, narrow experience. I did work at RLG before that, way before it became part of OCLC. And I was in library school at the same time I was working at RLG. So my comments today are based on my own experience as a library school student who was working full-time. I was at UC Berkeley back then. And also as an observer of one library and my own kind of trajectory through the library and my observation of the staff with whom I've worked all these years since 1983 when I came to Duke. So it's been kind of a laboratory for me. I'm acutely concerned as a director with recruiting and retaining the best possible candidates and in challenging staff to develop new skills and a new level of confidence by providing them with opportunities to stretch and grow. Both of these goals are of critical importance as we redefine the research library, and that's something that came up in the previous panel. One of my favorite expressions came from our Dean of Trinity College, that's the undergraduate Dean, Robert Thompson, who referred to us as an activist library. And I take that with great pride because I think of us not as sitting around waiting to be approached by people who have questions, but actually going out and being an integral part of the intellectual life of the campus, whether it's through our work with the Writing 20 program or the Focus program for first-year students, or in the case of Dean Thompson, he has partially funded a librarian position to work with undergraduates who are specifically focused on their honors theses, their senior theses, because that helps the faculty who have to advise these students, and they can't, as we increase the number of honors theses, it puts more of a burden on the faculty. So he saw an important role for librarians as partners with faculty in that, and I'm very interested in continuing those kinds of partnerships and expanding them. So before I go down a list of some adjectives and terms that will convey my sense of what's needed in new librarians, just some general comments. First of all, there are many paths to library work. We need a good mix of people working in libraries toward common goals. So people may come in through archives, they may come in with PhDs, they may come in through some unusual set of experiences or background. We need to accept and welcome that diversity, and diversity in this case means of opinion, of background, of race, of gender, of job level. Think of ourselves as a group that works together and brings a great variety of experiences and perspectives. We need to redefine our jobs and postings for what is needed. We talked about this a little bit yesterday in the SILS board meeting, that we, whenever there's a vacancy, we need to look at what's really needed and put together things that will really address where the library is going. But that makes me nervous, because I want to be sure that we're not writing job descriptions that are kind of pie in the sky or too idealistic, so that we won't get a good body of candidates, a good group of people who could actually succeed in that job. And the specific area I was talking about was our instructional technology area, and how we see right now kind of parallel tracks for the people in the library. Our Center for Instructional Technology is part of the Duke Libraries, but I think only one or two of those folks came through library school. So how can we kind of bring those tracks together and perhaps have some kind of hybrid positions that would be very rich in terms of communication and working with faculty. We need always to listen to users. Recently we invited a panel of 4 students to come talk with us about how they use technology in their work. And it was packed. All of the library staff was in there, very curious about this. 1 grad student, 3 undergrads. And we were sort of sadly surprised by some of the things they said, because here we are inventing new approaches and new things and new tools and new outreach, and not that they don't use any of those things, but they use completely different things. So we really need to listen to them and create our services based on that. Librarians provide value added and do things for faculty and students they can't do themselves a lot of the time. It's our goal for librarians to become indispensable in some ways. So in the interest of time, I'm going to just go down some of my list here. Teaching ability, the ability to relate to users. Technical ability, unfettered creative thinking. Confidence, above all, to be able to work with faculty as peers, to work and create things together, be partners. The ability to anticipate trends. We have something called the Visual Studies Initiative at Duke. We just received a big Mellon grant. And the implications for the libraries and the delivery of digital images of all sorts is just huge. And that, of course, will also have implications for our staff. Diplomacy. This is especially useful when you're in a management position. Patience is another thing when you're in a management position and deal with the university. Fundraising skills, business skills came up. Strategic thinking, flexibility has been raised already. No one today has mentioned languages, the importance of having some foreign language ability, which, of course, I'm a crusader for global studies, but I think that's very important. I guess Jay kind of implied it, and others did too. Pride in the profession and the unique contributions we make. I think that's one of the most important things. Sometimes we kind of sell ourselves short, you know, well, I'm just a librarian, you know, so-and-so's a faculty member, and I'm just a helper, but that's not what it's all about. It's really about partnership. Human resources, abilities, empathy, creativity has come up, commitment to public service, obviously, and innovation. And in closing, I would just like to say that I think we have to have a pioneer mentality, the ability to think beyond a given department, the big L, not just what's good for me or for my department, but an openness to the ideas of others, to answering the questions, where are we headed and where do we want to go? Thank you.
Michel? Well, si on parlait français, I want to speak other language. For those of you who don't recognize my strong southern accent, I'm originally from Belgium. I wanted to ask a question here. From the students here, I'm sure you thought already what you're going to do in the future. So who of you is coming to this school because you want to go work in a library? Typically, I mean, what I mean by that, organizing information, helping communities of users and patrons to access that information. Is it a public library, an academic library, or you know, a special library, as opposed to coming to this school to help, you know, use information potentially in an enterprise like mine, IBM, or other major companies like that. So who from you is more coming to this school to go work in a library? Would you please raise your hand? Okay, and who thought of the other side potentially? Okay, so roughly 80-20, 70-30%. So I'm representing the other side here. So in order not to repeat, I'm sure my colleagues will tell you a lot about the library side. I'll tell you what we expect on the other sides, just to give you that other perspective. You know, I just mentioned the process of information. You know, we need to organize it, which is probably one of the critical phases, because I always say garbage in, garbage out, right? And so that's really where the librarian skill, I believe, is the most valuable one. And there's a lot to do there, and with the new technologies, even more complicated, because information you get now is not only text, but it's video, it's audio, and all that stuff. And then, you know, once it's organized, hopefully you can help people accessing information, and looking at it from the user perspective is really important there. But when you go in an enterprise, when I hire people from this school, I expect them to be able to go to the next two steps. And that's changed quite dramatically the kind of job you can look at. And the next two steps is, okay, now I'm going to use that information, so that I can go to the next step. Now I can make a decision with that. Okay. Now the integration of those four is quite important. And, you know, I encourage you, if you go to the side of corporations, that these two other steps, you really need to learn about that. These are not easy things to do, because the decisions you make very big impact, usually. And it has been changing very recently that information analysis and decision-making based on information has become more and more important in corporations. If you look at corporations, I'm not old enough, but just take the last century, right? Up to the 60s, 70s, the big degree was to be an engineer. Most of the company were based on technologies. And several of them disappeared because they were lacking the next thing. Yeah, we build this great stuff, but nobody wants it. So digital doesn't exist anymore. You know, the Concorde doesn't exist anymore. Great technology, but nobody wants it. So the next big thing was marketing. And marketing was still accessible to a lot of people, because marketing was to try to figure out, okay, who actually needs this? Let's first ask what is needed in the market, so we build what the market needs. That's roughly what marketing is all about. But to do that, even 10, 15 years ago, you know, the type of information with access to do that was kind of limited, and was very similar to what you would find in a library. In IBM, we would have these libraries, and we would go there and ask for market research reports and analysis of the market, and we would have to buy them and wait for them to come, or read books, etc. And now suddenly comes internet. And and digital information. So now information is virtual, it's not physical anymore. And I can access it immediately. And now suddenly I have so much information I need to go through to understand and make my decision that what I used to do in the past is not enough anymore. It's a different skill. And we used to hire a lot of MBAs, Master in Business Administration, and we stopped that because we realized they come with great processes on how to develop a strategy, etc. But then when they see the mass of information they have to look at to make their decisions, they just fail. They just can't do that. So I'm telling you, the next big thing, I don't know what the name's going to be, you know, the Galactical Jedi or whatever it is. We're going to have to find a sexy name maybe for it. Maybe it's MLS, but I don't. It's going to be the kind of things you do. That's what corporations are going to need. And to do that, the kind of things we need from you is, well, clearly ethics and integrity is a fundamental one. I have no need to tell you what happened in the past, in corporation, and in government, and even today. And that's fundamental. I mean, I can tell you, I don't want to speak about ours, but I can tell you in my company, last year in December, somebody had to make a report about a new market opportunity, I won't tell you which one, and that person came around and looked at all the market data and made this big analysis and presented to executive that there was an opportunity that by 2010 would be $1.7 billion. And it happened that I made an analysis of the same market based on facts with analysts, and the opportunity was $163 million. So, you know, and I asked the guy, where did you get this from? Well, you know, we figured out, you know, this, and we made this calculation, so we estimated this. They did not do a truthful analysis of the information available to them, and we would have gone into a wrong market. So that's number one, integrity and ethics. And one of the reasons, by the way, why they did that, they told me that afterwards. They say, you know, we can get executive attention below $1 billion opportunity. I said, okay, so if it's not, don't create it. So ethics and integrity. The second important thing is to understand, and this is as valuable for librarians, understand the need of the users of the information. And today there are ways we can do that. This is the third generation of technologies, right? The first generation was just catalogs automation. There was nothing changed there. I just put what was on a paper in a database. The second generation was when all the information was digitized. And it's not about, you know, being able to send you the book so you don't have to buy the print. It's about when the information is entirely digitized, I can know what's in the information. So the data becomes the metadata, and the metadata becomes the data. Tremendous change in how you can organize and access your information. The third phenomenon that's going on right now, it's what's called Web 2.0 kind of things. It's, you know, what was in front of the Time magazine, it's you, right? And it is about, you know, things like folksonomies. Let everybody catalog. The Wisdom of Crowds. Ever read that book? You know, if everybody thinks that this is a paper tissue, I mean, if a cataloger says this is a paper tissue, but 80% of the people say it's a Kleenex, well, maybe we should call it a Kleenex. So the Wisdom of Crowds is about not one smart person saying, no, this is the exact word we should call this. It's about, see, that's when you look at it from a content management point of view. You don't think of it about the user. If most of the users call it a Kleenex and I want them to find it, I have to also use that word. So the power of you, the thing like Wikipedia, right? Who would ever believe that the mass of all of us would create something better than, you know, Encyclopedia Britannica? So understanding the users and letting them participate in the process is quite important. And you can know what your user do. If you go to my calendar, you will know the type of meetings I'm on. You go through my mail, and I can allow you to do that. And no, that's my decision. You can look at who I'm chatting with in the IBM internal chat system, who I'm calling, who I'm meeting with. And you know that today what I need information about is symbiotic computing, machine translation, speech technology. You know, these are the subjects I'm working on, and I can drill down. You should know that. And you can know it from my place in the directory, what organization I'm in, and when I move organization, you should know it. So you can prepare all that, well, almost automatically. So customizing to the user understanding is really important. And then the third thing is, you know, what I said, is being able, as an information service provider, person move to face analyzing and perhaps even making a decision. 10 years ago, I'm a strategist, so I manage a bunch of people who look for information. I would ask them questions, and they would come with the information. Now I ask them, I want you to come back with the information, and I want you to tell me what trends do you see out there. And the next thing I'm going to ask them, what would be your decision? And so we need these type of people. Believe me, enterprise will die for this. Because the amount of information we receive in a corporation today, information is not only what's in text on the internet, information is all over the place because other technologies are coming around like voice recognition. So I can listen real time to the people calling my company and I can know what's going on, that we have a problem with a product in a certain region. I can translate in real time today, etc. Now for these things to work, for voice recognition to work, you have to practice. You have to speak to it for 10 minutes, then it can recognize your voice. Likewise, if you're helping someone to find information, if you know better what that person is doing, you will deliver a better service. So these were the three things that we would look for. And so just want to leave it there. I don't take much time because I really want you guys to be able to ask questions later. Thank you very much. Mary.
Thank you very much. Can you hear okay? Yeah. What I want to talk about, and I'll try to be brief, and there are certain redundancies, but I think that's a good thing. If you hear something several times, there's a pattern, there's a reason for it. I've spent much of my career, 25 or so years of my career, working for the federal government. And when the federal government hires people, there is a form, and on that form there are certain requirements that must be met. And these are what we call our KSAs, our skills, our knowledge, skills, and abilities. And that's the context in which I want to make my remarks. Knowledge is, of course, what you're going to get while you're here at SILS in this fabulous institution, and it's going to be the content of all of the courses you take over those 48 hours. And the fact that you have 48 hours means that you will have more and better knowledge than some of the other people with whom you're competing for jobs. Basically what you're coming out with then is your broad understanding of the theory and practice of librarianship. And because I work largely with public libraries, I really am going to focus on back to the librarianship side of the house. You should be aware that to be a public library director in North Carolina, you must receive a public librarian certification, which is provided by the state library via the Public Library Certification Commission. And in order to have that certification, you are required to have coursework in collection development or collection management. Technology, which the course may not be called technology, but it must be evident through the coursework. Cataloging and management. And very, very interestingly, the course that most people don't have and therefore don't get their commissioning right away, their certification, is management, which I find very surprising because everybody at every level and every job is a manager of some kind. Even when I'm from Chapel Hill, I was a student here many years ago. I was a library assistant 3 at the University Library, the Wilson Library it was in those days, in the Humanities Reference Division, and I was supervising 2 students. I was a student, and I was supervising other students. There is management at every level of every organization, and you also have the author of the best management book that there is, so I'm not worried about you taking the management course or having it as a requirement here at SILS, but just for your note, just for your information that this is what it takes to be a public library director in North Carolina. If you don't, if a town or a county or a region hires a director who does not meet that standard, they have ability for state aid funding. So knowledge, you've got to have knowledge in this range of areas. Skills, that's the other thing you're going to really, really do very well with here. You're going to come out of this university with skills that I could only dream about. I also received a degree when I was 12 in 1973, and you know how much computer information there was. We actually did a little bit of programming language, but beyond that. You know, none of the rest of it existed. And through lifelong learning, we have managed to get our at the level that you will learn at this institution. The one I want to focus on is abilities. Well, this isn't something you can learn in the classroom. Well, yes it is. There are ways in which, no matter how knowledgeable or skilled that you are, that this is going to do you no good if you can't communicate this to the people who need to know it, be it your users or the management for whom you're working. If you want to improve your lot, if you want to improve your programs, if you want to do anything, eventually you're going to have to convince someone in this world of rapid change that this is the way we should go. And this may be a branch chief that you're working for in your first job, and it may be me talking to the governor of North Carolina through the Secretary of Cultural Resources. Whatever level it is, the abilities to do this work is still the same. And I like to break it down into the very basics. You need to be able to read, you need to be able to think, you need to be able to write, you need to be able to talk, and you need to be able to work together. You need to be able to read because you've got to understand the context in which you're operating. I read the News and Observer, and I read all about how, online of course, all about how North Carolina is changing from a world of furniture, workbenches, and farms to biotech laboratories and banks. And I know, okay, we need to provide these kinds of services in our public libraries around the state in that context. During the day-to-day, we've heard mentioned at least 6 or 7 book titles through the day. Everybody who's standing up here is reading books all the time, and they're standing up here talking about those books to you. And this is part of the lifelong learning, but it's also part of understanding where you are. But after you've read, you have to think critically. How does this apply? What can I do to take this new knowledge and apply it so that it works in my environment? Then you have to be able to write a paper. I had to create a program in which I had to first write a white paper that talked about the concept. And then after the white paper was accepted, I had to write a business case in which I could say there is a return on investment here, and this is why you should put these $2 million into completely recreating the oldest federal government library established by Thomas Jefferson into a 21st century information center. And then you have to be able to talk, and you have to be able to talk persuasively. And in one of the highlights of my career, I got to talk to Secretary of State Colin Powell and tell him why we needed to do this. And this is a very smart person who reads a lot, who lives in the online world. He says he doesn't have books anymore. He's been on the board of AOL. He knows what he's talking about. This is not someone you can stand in front of and not know what you're talking about as well. But he loved it. He thought it was wonderful. He wanted to see this happen. And he came for a 15-minute briefing and stayed for 45 minutes. This was wonderful, and it was a huge success. But it was because I was able to, well, along with the other people on my panel, communicate to him something that he understood, in language that he understood, and with an outcome that he found desirable. And then finally, I talked about working together. You know, those group projects you have to do with students. I know how much you hate them, because I hated them too. And there's always the one who doesn't do enough work, and turns in his papers on time, and then you have to get together, and you can never get your schedule straight, this sort of thing. At least you have email now. You can do it that way. But that's the real world. That's the way you're going to have to work out there. You're going to have to work in teams. You're going to have to work together. You're going to have to work collaboratively. I'm not doing that very well. And the other word that's been mentioned a few times today is partnerships. That's how we get our work done. So none of us is in the ivory tower. None of us knows everything. I actually took a course in this building about 25 years ago in municipal government management when I was director of the public library downtown in Chapel Hill. And we did an exercise in which everybody solved a problem individually, and then everybody solved the problem as a group. And in every single case, the group score was higher. And I learned from that day, and I still remember that in this building all these years later. So those are just things I want you to be thinking about. A couple of other really quick things that I want to mention that I think are important, and one of those is standards. Just by virtue of the fact that you are in the school, you are at a school that operates at a very high standard, I used to ask people after I got out of school, you know, what did you have to do? What did you have to do? Nobody had to do as much as I had to do. I had to have so many courses, 36 I think it was in those days. But I had to write a master's paper. I had to take a comprehensive exam, and I had to take a foreign language test. Well, throughout my career and my foreign service career, I studied Arabic, I studied Indonesian, and I studied German. It was relevant. I could not have done my job in librarianship if I hadn't been in a position to operate in that kind of an environment. Those kind of professional standards are not going to go away in this school, so we don't have to worry about that. The other thing that I want to mention is values. We've talked about ethics and integrity. No one has mentioned intellectual freedom. This is a real issue. It's an issue in our state. It's an issue in many, many places. It will never go away, and it's something that I encourage you to think about and to learn about. The other value that I would say, and this is something I learned in this school, is professionalism. This is a career. You're making a lifelong commitment as far as I'm concerned. This is something we talk about coming back regularly. Yes, the state library would love to be a partner in a program like that, in which education becomes a lifelong event. And you should, I was going to say this even before Roberta did, Ed Holly was the dean when I was in school. He was the incoming president of the American Library Association. He told us that every true professional will be a member of an association, whichever one, that's relevant, and will be active in the profession. He put us all on a bus and took us out to Washington to the midwinter meeting of the American Library Association, and I have been a member of ALA and an active participant for 33 continuous years. Thank you very much.
Duncan.
Thank you, David. I'm not as young as my colleagues up here, which is why I was personally offended by Jay's remarks about Melville Dewey, because he was a classmate of mine. On a snowy March afternoon in 1978, Ed Holly, Les Ashheim, Fred Roper, and Kay Murray met with a young man who did not meet the admission requirements of library science. It wasn't Sills back then, it was the School of Library Science. They decided to risk letting that young man in, and while he was here, he lucked into a course with Les Ashheim called Agencies of Mass Communication. And he was introduced to the works of Marshall McLuhan. That course and that book changed my life. And I was fortunate enough to have an ongoing relationship and ongoing conversations with Les. And those conversations changed what I viewed as originally as a profession into a calling. I've been asked to talk a little bit about novelists and what we're looking for in graduates and what skills you bring to us. And I think, first of all, what I want to say to you is that we are looking for people who are called both to our profession and to us. Novelist is a web-based reader's advisory service that's in use in 65% of the public libraries in the United States. We are expanding our reach into schools and into other countries, primarily Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. In 2005, the spring of 2005, we started a strategic planning process, and the first thing we did, we were looking at what is our future going to be. And the first thing we did was we hired a marketing consultant who was an MLS from University of Chicago, by the way, to conduct 100 in-depth interviews, phone interviews, with readers advisory librarians from across the country, public librarians from across the country. As we analyzed that data, what grew out of that, of our assessment, was 3 potential new products and a way that we could double our revenue in 5 years. That also required doubling our staff, of 14 moving to 28. And we also underestimated that, since we are now only in the 2nd year of our strategic plan, have 28 filled positions and 4 open positions, and we anticipate more. That strategic plan was presented to our management in August and fully funded, so we started hiring immediately. In March 2006, we launched our third product, which is Next Reads, and I'll come back to that in a minute, because SILS graduates are running that service. We will launch Novelist Select this spring, and in March 2008, we will launch Novelist Plus, which will have basically do for nonfiction, readable nonfiction, what Novelist is doing for fiction. We currently have a staff of 28, and that staff is divided up into about 60% librarians, 30% information technology people, 30% marketing and training and education support. Of the 5 graduates we've hired in the last year from SILS, one of them is assigning subject headings to popular adult fiction titles. 3 of them are working on Next Reads, and what Next Reads is an email newsletter service where we have approximately 22 different genres or categories of books. And every month we publish a new newsletter, and those newsletters are hosted by libraries all across the country. They are branded to look like they came from the local library, and they tie back into the local library catalog. And our colleagues is that they are, first of all, selecting the titles that go into that list 90 days in advance of publication. So they're not looking at reviewed titles, they're looking at predicting what titles are going to be popular. Then they are taking the software that we use to create those newsletters and handcrafting a newsletter. They're writing annotations, they're establishing read-alikes, books that are written like this or like this, and they are basically publishing 4 to 5 newsletters per person per month. That's their full-time job. Okay. We launched Next Reads in, as I said, March of 2006, and in the first quarter, we met and exceeded this year's budgeted projections. So it's booming. Another graduate of this school took her first professional position with us. That's Rebecca Sigmund, some of you may know her. And she is actually leading the development of Novelist Plus. She is working in an area where our profession has failed us. Our profession and its systems are very good at identifying the contents of materials. They are not good at identifying the audiences of those materials. And what I mean by that, I'm not talking about adult or juvenile. I'm talking about, of all the biographies that were published on Alexander Hamilton, for example, which ones do the general reader want to read? Which ones would a general reader want to read, as opposed to which ones are scholarly or which ones are just deadly dull? Because what our users want are the good ones. So we're having to develop structures and processes and systems to find and weed out the good ones from those 250,000 titles that are going to be published, that George is selling this year. Okay. That's her first job. She's working side by side with 3 members of our senior management team. She's on the phone on conference calls with some of the leading public librarians in this country. And she is doing you proud. Okay? We've already signaled our colleagues that she's one to watch and that to bring her along. Yeah. So that's sort of what we're doing right now. So I think what I'm looking for in terms of graduates from this school, specifically in just our content area, I'm looking for, first of all, graduates who understand the principles and practices and beliefs of our profession. I'm also looking for readers. Okay? And I'm not only looking for readers, I'm looking for students who understand the dynamics of the reading process, and more importantly, who understand reader behavior, reader needs, and how readers articulate and express their interests. If you've got a faculty slot and you can seduce Catherine Sheldrick Ross to come down here from Western Ontario, I'd holler on down here. Because she's doing the sort of, several people mentioned today studying users. She and her classes are doing in-depth interviews with real readers, and the data that is emerging from that is huge. There is no research anywhere within our profession, outside of our profession, that is yielding that kind of basic data on the fundamental reading act. Okay? If the program in literature didn't get her first over there, Deborah. Yeah, right. Okay. The other thing I want to do is very quickly is to talk a little bit about something else. Your 75th year celebration is illuminating the past and imagining the future. And as I'm closing here, I would like to illuminate something that I'm not sure people really value and know about a tradition that is here at this school and about the graduates that you are educating and sending out into the world. And I'm going to do that, I'm going to illustrate this, I'm going to illuminate this with 3 stories. The first story I want to tell is about Peggy Hall. Thank you, Peggy. Peggy was in 1982 in need of a job. Her temporary cataloging assignment at a pharmaceutical company out in the park had run out. And she heard a rumor. And that rumor was that there was a little startup company across the road that needed a librarian. So she went over there to interview for that job or that position and found out that they really didn't want a librarian. They wanted somebody who would arrange their journals. Well, she convinced them to hire her for 6 months. Maybe she convinced them that it would take her 6 months to arrange the journals. I don't know. But anyway, she got a 6-month stint there. And what happened is that this was a small startup company that was about to hit it big with a drug, but they hadn't hit it big yet. So the only meeting room was in the library. And so Peggy would listen to the meetings and the conversations that would go on in that library, and then she would do a literature search and take the results of that search to the parties that be and say, would you like me to get these for you? Well, 6 months later, Peggy had a job. And today, at GlaxoSmithKline, there are 17 professionals who manage, there are no journals to be arranged because it's all virtual, but there is a global virtual community there that has a £9 million annual budget for materials and is the 9th most visited community company, right behind the page people go to check their salaries. Pretty important placement. There's another story I want to tell you about a reference librarian in 2000, in the year 2000 out at the University of Washington. You heard his name mentioned earlier today, Peter McCracken, who just couldn't believe that there was no service that would let a library find easy access to all the journal articles that it had in all of its databases. Peter got together with his 2 brothers and a high school friend, and they formed a little company called Serial Solutions, which today is employing many people. And I was just on their website, and they've got 3 positions, which, while they don't require an MLS, say MLS preferred. Okay, so that's Peter. 2 graduates. David Singleton, who's the Assistant State Librarian, Deputy State Librarian down in Georgia, and Julie White, who manages Pines, which is the statewide catalog. Came up with something, started looking around at what Georgia needed, because it was time Pines was wearing out, and they had to figure out what kind of integrated library system that Georgia needed. So they went around and they did focus groups, and they talked to librarians about what librarians needed, and then they looked out and did an assessment of the products that were currently provided, and decided that none of them were delivering the system that Georgia needs. So they went to the legislature and got the funding to their own. So they created Evergreen, which is an open source system that's alive and well, and I believe that is saving the state of Georgia approximately $13 million a year. So what I wanted to point out here is that when people talk about taking risks, when people talk about looking outside the box, when people talk about taking our skills either within our organizations, traditional organizations, or outside our traditional organizations, that the tradition here is you're equipped to do that. So I would like to challenge you, if you're a student, to imagine a future in which you can do things like these people I just mentioned. And if you're a faculty member, I would like to challenge you to create learning opportunities and experiences and relationships that not only awaken these skills, talents, abilities, and knowledge in your students, but support and sustain them. Thank you.
Let's entertain questions or comments back and forth for a brief period of time, because we're beyond the limits of the day in terms of time. Does anyone want to ask questions of the panel here? David.
Well, prior to today, it seemed like everything I heard was for avenues of improvement in the field through business, and it seemed like our school is attacking these issues by adding courses of people in that background. But I wondered, how are we going to compete with the private sector if we're just looking at the dollar, and it's the only way to reposition ourselves? So it's refreshing to hear the panels talk today about going beyond the norm, taking risks, unfettered creative thinking, understanding the user. It makes me think if we're going on the interdisciplinary avenue with business, why not do that with things like sociology, anthropology, look at these things. So I'm wondering what you think, what kind of added value you would bring to our school to add people from the fields of sociology and anthropology and add those courses.
You're the panel.
Well, I'm going to say a couple of things about sociology and about anthropology. Both of those fields are focused on, understanding people and the way people behave, right? For example, there's a fascinating study by a woman named Elizabeth Long from University of Houston. I think that's right. No, Rice University. And she's a sociologist who looked at the behavior in, and that's been very insightful for us at Novelist World Headquarters, because we kind of always thought that book groups talked about the book. Well, they don't. They talk about themselves, and the book is a vehicle for that discussion. And that was very insightful and aware. And when I talk about, you've heard several people talk about user behavior, sociology and anthropology. I mean, you heard me mention Catherine Sheldrick Ross a few minutes ago. I've sort of defined her as a literary Margaret Mead, doing field work among the natives. I mean, so those disciplines, their practices and research methodologies and their findings are things that we should be looking at.
It's a good question.
Other questions? Well, in the absence of the dean, let me close this afternoon's conversations. Deborah also alluded to the pioneer mentality that is appropriate for us to adapt as we look at the future. And that connected to a question that I've cultivated. I like to cultivate questions that are essentially unanswerable, just to think about them every once in a while. And my question, the one that came to mind, is what is it that we leave behind when we cross a frontier? I often talk about the need to work and live and think on the edge, and I talk about wanting my students to think their hardest, most edgy thoughts. And so that notion of the frontier is pretty important to me, and it's obviously changing. It's in flow in our profession. So what do we leave behind when we cross a frontier? Well, I've decided that it doesn't matter. What matters is that we cross and that we move forward into whatever is on that other side of what we know and what we're familiar with and what has shaped us so far. This morning, before Michael Tiemann spoke, Judy Russell and Sarah McCulloch and Mary Boone and I were chatting. We were talking about librarianship as essentially a constructive profession. And that turned out to anticipate a good deal of what was said subsequently about Fred Kilgour. And I think that if we have to take the Kilgour lesson and understand it, we have to think about ourselves as people who want something to happen. No one enters this profession without wanting something to happen. I noticed also that Fred Kilgour was not an educator in the way that my colleagues and I are educators or professors, but that he seems to have educated just about everyone he met and left something extremely important and lasting behind. I thought also about an essay that I've always liked. It's by an educational researcher, a science education researcher named Eleanor Duckworth. And her essay is about, it's about a little boy making sense out of blocks. She studies him, and the essay is titled The Having of Wonderful Ideas, because as she observes him, he has wonderful ideas. And she says if education is not about the having of wonderful ideas, it's not about anything. And I would say that's true about our profession as well. Fred Kilgour was not an educator, as my colleagues and I are, but and he didn't appear steadily in front of a class to do what professors do, and yet it's clearly as an educator, as a transmitter, a leaver of legacies behind, that he was remembered this morning. And think of Jay Jordan, for example, walking past Fred's portrait every day on the way into work and leaving it at night, hoping that he's lived up to Fred's expectations for a good day's work. What an educator that is, a person to live up to, even against the odds. Michael Tiemann said an unfashionable thing this morning. He said, social responsibility is a strategic opportunity. Social responsibility is a strategic opportunity. And I think that Fred Kilgour would have understood the brilliance of that statement and the subtle implications it carries for the values we support and the actions that we take as educators. What also came back to me about a few hours ago, before we started our afternoon sessions, are the modest comments that Fred made about himself. Did you notice that? In the interview toward the end of the video, he made modest comments about himself and his legacy, and then aptly linked them really quite perfectly to the anecdote about Gregor Mendel. What impressed me is the image of Fred as the model of what I've been looking for all my life, the ego-free leader, the person who's willing to share what he knows with everyone and challenge others to do things with it, who's willing to share and write what he knows and distribute it widely, or the person who's willing to share and then think more about the user. It's not a bad way for living leaders, teachers, and learners to live up to his example. I want to thank all of the panelists today for assisting us to do this kind of thinking today and tomorrow. And I want to thank all of you for being here this morning and this afternoon, and for the conversations that I hope you will have that follow today. So thank you all very much.